Hello chess fans, in today's video I wanted to discuss something that I feel is not very discussed, which is basically the e4, e5 move orders and basically what e4, e5 is about. So e4, e5 obviously starts like this. And there's a lot of little nitpicky things that a lot of beginners and intermediate players even don't know when to tell the differences between. So for example, let's look at the main move here, which is knight f3. And at this point black has a variety of responses, but what I often see from beginners is that against d6, which is considered the Philidor, the best move here would be to break in the center, because if you have more development, generally you should break in the center. But what I see a lot from beginner players and less advanced players is that they continue to go for the setup they know, like let's say they go knight c3, bishop c4, this sort of setup. We shouldn't really be playing bishop c4 here or knight c3, because we should punish accordingly what our opponent has done. And so here, if you ever get the Philidor, remember that we break it with d4. A similar thing can be said about f6, which is a very bad move and is pretty much never played, but you have two ways to punish it, either to break in the center because your opponent is down in development, or here you have a cute tactic, which is knight takes e5, f takes e5, queen h5, but this I think is less good because after knight takes e5 they have queen e7. So instead we should go d4. But this is a common thing. So when your opponent doesn't develop in the opening, like with d6 or with f6, make sure to punish it by breaking in the center. Another thing to be said is about bishop c4 move orders. Here, black has two main moves which get into a lot of theory, which are knight f6 and bishop c5. And both these moves allow a similar transition position, which is after knight f6. Here, we can play d3. Another common mistake to make by beginners is knight c3, and here black would have the center fork trick, and black is to be slightly preferred. We go d3 so that black doesn't have the center fork trick, and after bishop c5, c3, d6, the position will transpose from bishop c5. But the extra option that white has after knight f6 is to go knight g5 and go for the fried liver, which is not supposed to be the greatest attempt for an advantage by white, but still is pretty practically dangerous for players with the black pieces. And against bishop c5, the extra option you have, obviously you can go d3 here, knight f6 and c3, and transpose after d6. This is the Gyoko piano. Players would likely look to bishop b3, bishop c2, castles, this classic knight maneuver, rook comes to e1, possibly bishop g5 ideas. They're becoming very trendy recently. But the main move basically is to go c3 first, and after knight f6, the main move here would be to go d3 and go for the Gyoko pianissimo. But the extra option you have is now to play d4. And this is known, I think, to be dead equal, but Wesley So has recently been playing e takes d4 and e5, and this line is pretty interesting try for white for an advantage, though I think at the end it's supposed to be equal. So this was a little bit briefly about bishop c4 and the different sort of positions that can arise. But we also must talk about how a lot of players, after knight f6, maybe after bishop c5, you're used to playing knight c3. And this is a fine move here because they don't have the center fork trick. But a common way you can get tricked is after knight f6, you think, oh, okay, I'll just develop a piece and protect my pawn with knight c3, and then you fall for the center fork trick. And the final thing I wanted to discuss about these e4, e5 move orders is the Ruy Lopez, the most common sort of position there is in chess, almost, with over like hundreds of thousands of games. And I specifically wanted to talk about the difference between a6 and knight f6. Because if we look at the main line of a6, it goes a6, bishop at a4, and knight f6. And how is this really different from knight f6 right away? Why on the grandmaster level are these positions just completely different? Knight f6 usually fighting for a draw, and a6 usually fighting for basically a complicated position. So I believe it's mainly for two reasons. When you play a6, bishop a4, you sort of have to keep this as an anchor of your position, as the bishop is still eyeing the king. And so what's likely going to happen is b5 to get the bishop away, and then d6, knight f6, bishop b7, castles, and holding down this pawn as an anchor. Or, because this pawn is so important, we sacrifice it in the marshal with something like knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b6, castles, c3 here. This would be the martial attack. Here we sack the pawn, for basically a development edge. Or yeah, black sacks it for a development edge. But the other way, the main way to play this position is with d6 and basically holding down this pawn. Now this is different from knight f6 because with knight f6, we're obviously not intending to play this sort of d6 ideas because we can't get this bishop off of here. For example, if after castles we played d6, we'd be running directly into d4 and we couldn't answer it with b5 and some sort of Noah's Ark track. For example, after a6, instead after a6 bishop here, if we went castles d6, a common mistake might be to play d4, and this is actually a trap because after b5, bishop b3, we have knight takes d4, knight takes d4, ce takes d4, and this pawn is off limits because after takes here, c5, c4 would be winning the piece. And thus we can see that when we go for knight f6, we can no longer go for these d6 ideas. But what do we instead want to do with this bishop? Because obviously, for this to make any sense, not to play a6, we have to do something against this bishop. And what we're going to do is after castles, which is the main line, you can also play d3, but then after bishop c5, basically black argues that a6, b5 would have created weaknesses after a4. And so here black is supposed to be equal. So the best testing way to play this is with castles. And here what black will usually do is take here, rook e1, and then get this crucial tempo with knight d6. And then here we see why basically this position is usually avoided now. Or the main line would be d4, but then black would still go knight d6 and get this crucial tempo. And after bishop takes c6, this would be everyone's least favorite Berlin endgame. So basically the idea with knight f6 is that we're going to get another tempo on this bishop. And then we also must talk about, when talking about these knight f6 ideas, why is the open variation not common then? After a6, bishop a4, knight f6 castles, another variation here is to go knight takes f6. Now this is a little bit more loose because the bishop is going to have the ability to get on this diagonal where it's going to create a lot of pressure. For example, looking at the main line, d4, b5, bishop b3, I think in this position, yeah, black doesn't have time to go for knight c5. If we played rook e1, knight c5, and I think black is doing well. But here we do d4 not to allow that, and if takes, the e file opening up is just killer. So b5, bishop b3, d5 to sack back the pawn, and after d takes here, we see that black's center is very weak with all these pieces basically nicely coordinating to control the squares, and black has a lot of weak squares here. And so this is much different than the Berlin endgame where we could have got this tempo with after knight f6, knight takes c4, knight d6. Alright, so that's pretty much all I wanted to discuss with the sort of e4, e4, e5 move orders, and basically it's just to give some general understanding of this. If you like this video and want to see more about understanding different types of openings, not from a theoretical point of view, but just from a positional point of view, make sure to tell me down below what type of opening you might want to see next. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.